Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Wavelength.
You know, Adelaide has worked really hard over the last few years to build a small bar reputation. When I was a kid, the big night in Adelaide was kind of, staying at home and watching the bill.
Sparking the combos about Adelaide.
As a female Sparky, I did get lots of comments on my gender.
You should be having.
And here to make a difference. Yeah, make the difference. Give the youth a voice.
On Fresh 92.7.
Welcome to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having with Zane and David, back after a week off.
Yes, Zane. How was your holiday?
It feels like it's been an eternity. It was so good. I'm feeling relaxed, and I'm feeling like I'm probably going to make a number of paneling mistakes on this show.
Oh, classic.
And you've been in Melbourne doing all sorts of claptrap. I don't know.
Claptrap?
What have you been doing?
What does that mean?
Nonsense.
Oh, okay.
Busy things.
Well, yeah, I've been running around, just sprinting everywhere, trying to get things done. But today...
Good chat.
Today everyone's talking about how a 3-year-old girl has tragically died in hospital after sustaining serious burns from a house fire in Port Augusta last Friday. The cause of the fire has not yet been determined, but police say it was not suspicious. The SANFL has handed down its first ever ban after former Norwood and Gold Coast Suns player Josh Glenn tested positive for anabolic steroids in his system. He will not be able to return to any SANFL or AFL sanctioned games until August 2022. And the owners of indoor BMX site Pumped Indoor have been forced to shut up shop after they were unable to find a buyer for the business. The Marston Centre had been a popular spot for BMX riders since it opened 2.5 years ago.
Tonight, should we legalise it? We discuss whether we should follow Canberra's lead on cannabis. We hit the streets to ask whether your life has changed since Facebook dropped the likes. And next, do we really need to subscribe to all these new streaming services? Or are we just going to get driven straight back to torrenting?
Wavelength.
For a while, we had Netflix and Stan, and everything was peaceful. Then Amazon Prime joined the fray, now Apple TV Plus, and by the end of the year, Disney as well.
So how many streaming services is too many? That is the question that we wanted to get to the bottom of.
Wavelength.
Ever flick through Netflix to watch something in particular, only to find it's not there? Maybe it's on Stan or Amazon Prime, maybe not. And as annoying as it is, this could start happening a whole lot more. With Disney Plus and Apple TV Plus just about to launch, should we be expected to subscribe to all these different streaming platforms? And could it actually end up driving people back to piracy? To get the lowdown, I spoke with Cam Williams, a writer and screen critic, who says these new platforms could lead to a much more competitive streaming market.
I think it's going to make people that subscribe to these services more conscious of the amount of money that they're spending on subscriptions. Most households may have 2 or 3 services that they subscribe to, but the draw of Disney Plus and Apple streaming service may make them reconsider the ones that they currently subscribe to. So I think the more subscriptions that we keep adding, the more are going to have to be bumped out if people can't afford it. So that's going to make it really competitive for these services in Australia to try and keep their current subscriber base, but we'll have to wait and see what happens after they launch.
So why are all these organisations launching their own streaming service?
I think every organisation now wants to control the content that they own. For a really long period of time, a lot of these major media companies have kind of leased their content out to different distributors, and so they've lost control of the way that it goes out into the world. And I think ever since the rise of Netflix and the way that they've kind of curated content and controlled it, every other organisation has looked to them as a successful case study. And so now we're seeing every single media organisation set up their own version of Netflix in a way to control their own content, which is a big deal because that means that all of the content that was leased out to the other services is now getting sucked back into those big media organisations for their own platform.
Could having so many of these platforms lead people right back to piracy?
Definitely, and Australia has a really bad track record when it comes to piracy, and I think that's kind of a habit that we've learned over a long period of time due to a lack of access to things. And so the problem we have in Australia is that people are so used to downloading and pirating. I think there's a whole cross-section of different people of different generations that are accustomed to downloading films and TV shows, and they know where to go to get that content. So we've kind of been trained to access content that way. In your mind, you may go, oh, cool, I'm only going to pay for 2 and I'll just pirate the rest. And I think that's mainly due to bad behaviour that we've gotten used to getting away with.
Cam says traditional broadcasters are rebranding their original content and experimenting with how they stream to stay relevant. He also explains that if you're considering what subscriptions to keep, it's worth examining how much you're watching.
The biggest thing I'm noticing with all of the streaming services is a lot of them are producing their own original TV shows and original films, but you got to really think about how many of them are you going back and rewatching or revisiting, because a lot of these streaming services, once you binge a show, they can stay idle and you're not really watching anything on those services for a little while. So if that's happening, you need to kind of reconsider whether it's worth, paying for 2 months worth of a subscription that you're not really using. So look for the services that are kind of constantly adding new content and things that you can watch, but also replay value. A lot of the streaming services still haven't found their classic. Is there a streaming service that has made a show that's at the same level as Friends or Seinfeld or The Office? So take away The Office and what have you got? You've got nothing sustaining people while they wait for the next Stranger Things. So I think you need to think carefully about what shows are on there that you're going to rewatch, and if they're not producing new series and new films, then it's probably worth pushing that one to the bottom of the pile.
So there you have it. Make sure you're getting the content you actually want. However, Cam says you also shouldn't forget there are free streaming services too.
We are lucky in Australia to have a lot of access to free streaming services. So I think as we move towards November this year and beyond, something like ABC iView and SBS On Demand are going to become really important, because as much as we want to get into the hottest and newest things, there are lots of people working really hard to make sure that those services have really great TV shows. But yet, if we didn't have iView or SBS On Demand, it'd be a little bit more barren out there when it comes to the free stuff. So don't take those services for granted.
Wavelength.
We're chatting about streaming services and the sheer amount of them that have come out, particularly over the last kind of 6 months and into next year. It feels like we've gone from having 2 in Australia to having so many.
There's too many, honestly.
Too many?
Yeah.
I'm not interested. I'm scared, and
It reminds me a lot of, buying channels on Foxtel. You know how you had to, you just had to keep buying different channels, which had, or bundles of channels, which had more content. I found this on Twitter in the US. If you subscribe to all of the, major streaming services, so that's HBO Max, Netflix, Hulu, Showtime, CBS, Prime, Stars, Disney Plus, and Apple TV Plus, that costs you $90 per month, which is about $130 Australian, which is ridiculous.
That's insanity. I'm not paying that much to watch.
Nobody needs
watch
that
my
much.
Stories.
Nobody needs that much content. I'm sorry.
But what I don't like is that it's getting so splintered as well. It felt like between Netflix and Stan, you could get most things.
Yeah.
It was I was okay with having 2. But now I need 7.
I can totally see people going back to torrenting. I mean, people still do it, but...
My mum still does it, actually.
Just outing your mum as a criminal on the radio now?
Yeah, feds, don't look this up. Turn down your radio now if you're a cop. So this is really interesting, right? We taught her how to use torrenting sites and stuff.
Mm-hmm. That shall not be named.
Yeah. Back when my brother and I probably had the patience to do something like this.
Yeah.
And the world's kind of now moved into this streaming age, and she's just, she doesn't really use Spotify or Apple Music, and doesn't really, I think she uses Netflix a bit now, but it took her a long time, and she still torrents a lot of stuff.
She's just used to it.
Yeah, someone's taught her how to do this and she refuses to learn the next step.
Yeah, fair enough.
Which is such a mum way of going about this.
I mean...
But now maybe she was on the right side of the curve all along.
She probably was.
Maybe I'm going to need to ask my mum for help getting back into this world if these streaming services don't work out.
Yep, pretty much.
Which is a very grim thing to think about.
It is.
What the hell is going on in politics at the moment? Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
In a totally not chilling move, PM Scott Morrison says the government could apply penalties to protesters who target businesses involved with the mining industry. The PM says progressive protesters, among others, are seeking to deny the liberties of Australians, although the Greens say the move is a threat to freedom of speech. Amid environmental protests in Melbourne, Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton also says demonstrators are, quote, against our way of life and wants them to pay for the cost of the police response to their protests. Heading overseas now, and it's been a big week in the UK. British politicians have agreed to hold an election early next month after successfully delaying Brexit until the end of January. This is the second election since the Brexit poll in 2016. And finally to the US, impeachment proceedings against Donald Trump are rolling on. The Democratic opposition have voted to establish a public phase of the impeachment inquiry, with the president in usual fashion saying it's a witch hunt. If you can't remember quite what this is all over, well, Mr. Trump allegedly threatened to withhold aid from Ukraine if they didn't look into the president's political rival, Joe Biden. It's definitely going to be a bumpy few months in America. And that's what the hell's going on in politics this week.
Thank you, Andrew. These protesting laws?
Very odd.
What?
Very, very draconian, very strange.
I also don't understand how you can make a boycott illegal. Like,
yeah.
Because a boycott is basically where you, like, en masse, you abandon, like, from purchasing something or from attending somewhere. Like,
it's like inaction. So it's like,
yeah.
Right now I'm not literally buying a packet of chips from the convenience store.
Yeah.
Am I boycotting something?
Well, yeah, like say we wanted to boycott the convenience store. Is this law going to make us go to the convenience store?
Yep, just march on down.
I don't understand.
It's very weird.
I also would never boycott that convenience store around the corner from Fresh because it's just been there for me when no one else was.
It really is just always there when you need it.
Wavelength.
So a couple of weeks ago, Canberra legalised cannabis in an Australian first move, which was pretty amazing. But you might have seen that the federal government is trying its absolute hardest to reverse the decision.
So hard.
They just really don't like it.
They're not Peter Dutton, not on it.
No weed in my house?
Nah, the who's the bloody Attorney General guy? Not on it. Christian, whatever his name is.
No.
Off it completely.
Just hates it. But we wanted to know whether SA should actually follow suit.
Wavelength.
Marijuana, weed, ganja, Mary Jane, the devil's lettuce, whatever you want to call it, and wherever you stand, everyone has an opinion when it comes to the legalisation of cannabis. Earlier this year, the Australian Capital Territory became the first Australian jurisdiction to legalise the possession, use and cultivation of personal cannabis. Coming into effect at the end of January next year, the law will allow possession of up to 50 grams per person and a maximum of 4 plants per household. However, it's not all smooth sailing for weed enthusiasts, with Commonwealth laws prohibiting possession still overriding new legislation, with potential users warned they could still face charges and even jail time if caught. But is it now time for the Commonwealth to catch up, with many other advanced Western nations embracing the potential health and economic benefits of legalised marijuana, like Canada and many areas in the US? According to statistics, just under 35% of Aussies over the age of 14 have used cannabis at least once in their life. Andrew sat down with Michael Pedersen, a Labor member of the ACT Legislative and the man behind the push for legalisation, to get his thoughts.
Michael, what inspired your push for cannabis legalisation in the Australian Capital Territory?
Because of our drug laws, getting caught with a small amount of cannabis can ruin your life. Now, not everyone. Most people in the ACT right now who are caught with a small amount of cannabis just receive a fine, but not everyone does. Some people receive criminal charge and conviction, and I don't think that's right.
So the ACT passed these new laws back in September, with them due to come into effect next January. What's been the general reaction to the legalisation of cannabis in the Territory?
It's been overwhelmingly positive. There was government research done just recently which showed that 54% of Canberrans support the legalisation of cannabis for personal use, with only 27% of Canberrans opposed. So, speaking generally, Canberrans are very supportive of this legislation.
Why do you think cannabis should be legalised generally, and are the dangers of it perhaps over-exaggerated by some?
I want to be very clear that I'm not encouraging anyone to use cannabis. There are consequences in a medical sense to the use of cannabis. But what I do want to say is that people that use cannabis are best served by seeing a doctor, not going through the criminal justice system.
Michael says it's worth remembering there is a difference between medical marijuana laws nationally and those relating to personal use.
I think it's really important that we don't associate the current medicinal marijuana scheme that's in place by the Commonwealth with the proposal for recreational cannabis. People that want to medicate using cannabis should have a medicinal system that works for them.
So what exactly has the federal government been saying about the new laws, and do you expect them to legally challenge it in the coming months?
They've said a lot. It's been a bit confusing trying to follow their position from day to day. Generally speaking, the Commonwealth government does not support what we have done in the ACT. The question is how and if they will respond to it. On that question, I'm not sure. But to the current legal questions, the ACT is on solid legal ground.
Despite the new laws legalising possession of a small amount of cannabis through the ACT system, could people in the Territory still face prosecution through national law?
If the Commonwealth wants to prosecute Canberrans with Commonwealth law, that is within their power. But what I want to point out is that the laws that we passed in the ACT were laws that empower a defence that is currently written into Commonwealth law that cannabis use excused or justified by a state or territory law provides a defence to that Commonwealth possession charge.
Should we be legalising cannabis nationwide? Could it be a national thing, or should it be done state by state?
I'm not in the business of giving advice to other parliaments. What I will say is this. Canberrans support the legalisation of cannabis for personal use. That might not be the right fit for every community. I think it's about time that Australians, generally speaking, have a conversation about what sensible drug law reform works for their communities.
Wavelength.
Andrew and Nick doing an investigation into whether SA should legalise marijuana for Wavelength on Fresh 92.7. And also looking into the whole situation in Canberra at the moment, where Canberra basically passed a law to legalise weed, but
Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
they're at the mercy of the federal government, much more
They
so
are.
than us as a state, because they're a territory.
They can basically be overruled.
Yeah, so there's this massive fight kind of happening there at the moment.
I was thinking about this, though, because it almost seems that, like, Canberra is somewhat of, like, a cultural barometer in Australia, because they legalised same-sex marriage in the ACT before it was legalised federally.
Yeah.
And that got shut down, and then, like, a couple of years later, it was legalised around the country. So I don't know if this can really apply the same way, but it seems like a sort of progressive barometer for how the rest of the country thinks, because it is, in a lot of ways, a lot easier for them to pass laws and to sort of get those progressive things across the line.
Yeah, they're also a lot smaller.
Yeah.
And I think just the general population leans a bit more in favour of those kinds of things.
Totally.
Yeah. I think we will see it. I think it's an inevitability.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's an
not
absolute,
quite. Yeah,
I think it's an absolute inevitability. I think that we'll probably see the next 2 or 3 years. I'd say that it will be legalised federally.
I feel like it'll take longer than that, but
we should make a bet.
It could. I will lose that. I have never been good at that. Story in a couple of weeks on gambling.
Wavelength.
Tonight, asking whether we should follow Canberra's lead on cannabis and legalise it.
Yes. Should we open up 420 stores? Nah?
I saw the
Not
cogs
feeling
turn
that?
in your head
You're not
as you
feeling?
tried to land that.
I didn't
I
land.
appreciate the effort.
I mean, I try sometimes. I try really hard for you, Zane.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We've got a couple of callers on the line. Let's get into it. Garth, you support legalisation to an extent.
Yeah, I support it for medical reasons.
So explain that. Like, when is it okay for you to use in your opinion?
All right, so I talk a lot about this as brief as possible. The current medical marijuana laws do not work.
Mm-hmm.
They pretty much exclude anyone from a lower socioeconomic group, and not to mention the fact that the forms that the people that want to get in on medical marijuana, there's too many forms, too much time it takes for the doctor to fill out the form.
Mm-hmm.
The medical marijuana, all it is one simple ingredient out of the cannabis plant, and that's the THC. Yet there are so many other ingredients in cannabis that have beneficial effects.
Yeah. Yes, completely. And I've heard a lot of stories to the effect of what you're explaining, Garth, of how trying to access the limited permissible uses we have in Australia for medical marijuana is actually really, really difficult and basically, nigh on impossible to access.
Yeah, and there are so many afflictions that the other ingredients in cannabis can help with, especially CBD.
Yes, for sure, Garth. We've got to move on, but just quickly, you used to host a show on Fresh, didn't you?
Yes, I used to host the Monday chat room.
Shout out our spiritual predecessors. Thank you so much for calling in, Garth. Let's quickly get to Andy. You support legalisation across the board, is that correct?
Hello?
Hey, Andy.
How you going, mate? Yeah, well, most definitely.
Great.
Definitely.
Why do you support the legalisation of marijuana?
Well, just the legalisation of marijuana, if it was recreational or medicinal, for our state alone would take our state out of a deficit. All states that have taken on board across in America, I mean, these are the Americans and they have pretty right-wing movements over there, they've taken it on board, and complete states that have been in hundreds of millions of dollars are now turning proactive. It's more, I mean, for God's sake, we've got to come up to speed. If you've actually sat down and had someone that's had terminal cancer or someone that's been involved and actually gets to the benefits of medicinal marijuana, that's great in itself, but it's a plant, for God's sake. We sell at corner stores sell tobacco quite freely. You can go and get in there and get a, these liquid e-cigarettes. Kids can get them all across the board. We don't know what's in them. So with marijuana, we've come to the conclusion it's across the world. This is not just one person taking it on board in one country. This is across all countries are doing it. So why shouldn't we get on board? South Australia needs to be more proactive.
I absolutely agree with you there, Andy. I know over in the US, the industry is just miles and miles and years ahead of where we are at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, for God's sake, there's 50 states over there that are actually ghost bowls. They were dead, and all they are is like third world countries, and then they take it on board now. Surely if our state, which has got a sister state, Arizona, could take on, maybe have a look at their addressing, and all the other states now, I mean, then over there they still hang people, they execute people over, for God's sake. They're pretty short-minded in some things, so they can see the beneficial. They are.
Yeah.
They hang people in states, God, so they still have, I mean, still pathway in some places in America. If that country itself can take on board as a whole, marijuana as in medicinal and recreational, there's not been one recorded death from smoking of marijuana.
Yeah. For sure.
It's a great point. If America can do it, why not Australia?
We also got a couple of texts about that particular economic argument that the revenue you'd make from actually making it regulated, making it taxable for people to buy, would just do wonders for the economy.
Wavelength.
But we've had some other calls come through, and I really want to chat to you, Brian. Are you there?
Hello there.
Brian, do you want to tell us your story of why you believe in the legalisation of cannabis?
Well, first of all, I used to be dead against it. Any sort of drug, it's a big no-no.
Mm-hmm.
My son was in a serious accident many years ago, and from that accident, he had severe pain episodes. And over the last, let's say, 5 years, he's had over 200 emergency visits. That's without all the operations to try and solve this problem that he keeps getting. And the pain is so severe that he will pass out from it. Right. The pain units were at a standstill. They didn't really know where to go until one doctor said, have you tried cannabidiol, the THC combined with the CBD?
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like a miracle thing. It just goes under the tongue. It's only a small amount. He doesn't hallucinate. He doesn't bounce off the walls or any other side effects or nothing, and the episodes have virtually ceased. So he's gone from maybe 20 a year at the moment. At the very most, there is some triggers and he has to go to hospital, but it's just put a lid on it.
That is absolutely incredible. I think that just proves to me and to, I guess, all of our listeners that I think cannabis has come a long way from being just a drug to get high. It's a very powerful drug that can help a lot of people, especially like your son, Brian.
Yeah.
Yeah, this state needs to be on the forefront and say that we'll take the lead in Australia, because this state needs something to really kickstart it, and this sort of thing could just be what we need in this state.
Brian, can I quickly ask before we move on, how easy did you find accessing CBD oil?
It wasn't easy at all. You have to go through the Therapeutic Goods Administration.
Yep.
You have to have a doctor that's willing to prescribe it. There's so many hoops that you have to jump through, and it is expensive. The CBD oil, which is just a small amount, will last him about maybe 6 weeks, and that's $500.
Wow.
And then the THC CBD combined, that's $350. So we're looking at about $850 about every 6 weeks.
Just to be free from pain. That is ridiculous.
Yeah, but put that into context. An ambulance visit will cost you somewhere like around about $1,200 just for one visit. So when you do the sums, you go, it's a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that interesting that you're in one of those rare positions where even that kind of arduous and expensive process to get access to CBD oil is the more financially prudent thing to do? But imagine if it was subsidised.
Look, yeah, if it was subsidised, there's so many things that, so many ailments that it could help. Especially, I read up a lot on this, and there's children who are having maybe 80 to 100 fits a day, and it's not doing them any good. And the poor parents are giving them the CBD oil, and it's a bit like a miracle cure. And all of a sudden, their children are starting to have an active life, and they're getting put in prison and being vindicated on things that they shouldn't. They're at their wit's end, and I just feel really sorry for them.
Brian, thank you so much for sharing your story, and through sharing more stories like that, we might actually get change in this area. I hope people are listening.
Well, I mean, subsidising is one thing, but it seems like access is just insane, because I know that there's so many layers because it's a federal law, but each state still has to... There's like a layer of state law and a layer of federal law that you have to go through to get this. It's crazy.
It's such a rigmarole. Let's quickly get stuck into part 2 of this investigation. 1300 73 73 74 if you would like to call in and let us know whether you believe in legalising marijuana. We've heard from Brian about the benefits of legalisation.
Which are amazing.
A pretty incredible situation. As Nick and Andrew discovered, there are some more unexpected benefits as well.
Wavelength.
When it comes to medicinal marijuana, it seems most Australians are in agreement, with a 2016 survey by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare finding 85% of Aussies favoured the use of cannabis for medicinal purposes, up 16% from 3 years prior. But it's not just humans who have the potential for gain from increased medicinal use. I sat down with Leighton Mills, the founder and managing director of CanPow, an animal health and therapeutics company, to talk to him about the wider benefits of increased medical use.
CanPow is an animal health company on a mission to provide veterinarians and pet owners with access to high-quality, plant-derived therapeutic products to promote better health and well-being for companion animals. We're currently focused on the development of pharmaceutical and nutraceutical products for dogs using compounds derived from the cannabis plant. So it's really about providing pet owners and veterinarians with access to naturally derived, safe alternatives to some of the current treatments that are on the market.
Do you think we should legalise marijuana in Australia?
The reality is that the cannabis is already legal in Australia. Medical cannabis is legal. Australia legalised cannabis in 2016, I think it was. So I guess the better question is, can they improve legalisation, or does legalisation refer to now implementing legislation for recreational use? You know, the reality is that it is legal. The difficulties we have is that it's probably not ideal.
What benefits does cannabis present to animals and people?
You know, humans as well as animals, in fact, most mammals, some invertebrates, all mammals and some invertebrates have what's known as this endocannabinoid system. It's probably one of the most important discoveries that we've had in the last 20, 30 years. It's a system that's involved in almost every physiological process in the body. There are endocannabinoid receptors found in almost every part of the body, and the endocannabinoid system is involved in various different physiological processes such as inflammation control, pain control, mood enhancement, neurological function, neuroprotective capabilities. So humans and animals alike can share in the same sort of benefit. I think that the challenge that we've got as an industry is to improve and contribute more to validated research to support exactly what kind of benefit and which of those physiological functions we can get better at treating. There's been plenty of research in animal models that simply hasn't translated across to the human space. That's why we're doing research.
Do you see any major arguments against legalisation?
To put it into perspective as to what's potentially not working well is the fact that as of April this year, I think there was only about 55 or so authorised prescribers of cannabis. Putting that into perspective, I think there's about 40,000, 45,000 general practitioners or doctors in Australia, and 70,000 when you count specialist medical practitioners. So I think legalisation is already here. We have a legal regulatory landscape. The challenge is improving that, understanding what cannabis can potentially treat, and then providing better access to patients through medical practitioners.
If all medical practitioners could prescribe cannabis, what sort of restrictions would you like to see?
We really need more controls in place for how providers of medical cannabis products, more controls put into place in terms of stability, good manufacturing processes, ensuring the products are well tested, are very well characterised, and have a good analytical oversight. That's probably something we're not seeing at the moment. Secondary to that is actually validating what people are selling. So you've got a lot of companies who are selling or providing medical cannabis to patients without doing any sort of research to validate that their product is suitable or beneficial for treating a disease. And I think that's something that really needs to be improved.
Do you think if more people would be able to grow it, like in ACT, would that reduce the quality of the product in the market and potentially introduce some dangers there?
I can't see them implementing legislation that would allow anyone to go and grow cannabis and then sell that cannabis into the marketplace. Just like anyone who wants to operate a business, there are particular requirements they need to meet. But as long as we have standards implemented around things like where they're getting their seed, who they're providing it to, making sure they're not selling it, and I think we can control that. But I think what is more important is, again, going back to the safety component, is that, you know, how do we know what kind of impact some of the compounds are having on different populations of people that may have different genetic makeups, etc. I think there's more research needs to be done there also.
Wavelength.
That was Nick and Andrew investigating how we could improve the legalisation of marijuana here, and all of the kind of issues that are involved in that.
And they were chatting with Leighton Mills, CEO of Campal, who makes pot for pets. Not really.
That is something I never thought about.
They definitely don't get high off it, but it is definitely still cannabis.
So interesting.
The many multiple uses of this drug, Zane.
Wavelength.
Should we legalise weed in the great state of South Australia?
That is the question. We've heard some amazing stories from people, amazing articulations of why we should do it. We also have on the line with us, Steve, you also have a pretty incredible story about legalising cannabis.
Yep.
Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, sure. So my daughter has autism. She's had it since she was young. She was diagnosed when she was 4. We've tried all different types of medicine to sort of calm her down because she can get quite, you know, upset over things. And recently the doctors decided to try cannabis. Once again, it's not cheap, but it was worth a try. And she's only been taking it. Well, she's only been taking it for a couple of weeks, and we've already started to see good results. She's not as sort of angry over things. She's more mellow. But it's something we definitely need to bring in because, it's quite good for a lot of people out there.
Well, so you're pretty new to, I guess, the whole experience of getting medicinal marijuana for your daughter. How did you find the process? Was it pretty difficult to get through? Was it arduous?
Well, there's quite a lot involved. There's a lot of paperwork and, you know, why do you need it and what have you, which I don't think you should really have to do. Like, she's diagnosed with autism. She should just, you know, that should be it. But, we had to fill out a lot of paperwork, and like the other gentleman was saying, it's not cheap, but it's actually showing really good results. So, and if ACT can do it, we should really follow, I think.
Yeah, do you think that we should, would you like to see even it sort of be legalised recreationally so people could go out and buy cannabis products even if they don't need it for a medicinal reason? Do you think that's a good way forward?
Well, you got to be careful, really. I think it's mainly for, you know, if you've got disabilities or you've had an accident or something, we just got to be careful with it because if it gets a bit out of hand, then, you know, it could be a problem. But I think we need to look at it. And if it's an ACT, it should be everywhere. So why don't we all follow, you know?
Totally.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you for sharing your story, first of all. That, again, really incredible. And I really appreciate when people come on air with us and really share that more personal side of things.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of the times you might be hearing about medicinal cannabis, but like hearing like how it is actually helping people and changing people's lives is just really, I guess, drives home that this is a really important drug for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's one thing to talk about it in the abstract, but to hear real life situations where this has improved someone's life, it's just absolutely incredible. We have got to get into our very last story for the night before we let the come up start. So let's do an abrupt tonal shift here. It's been some time since Facebook removed oh my goodness, this sentence. It's been some time since Facebook removed like counts from posts following the same move from Instagram earlier this year. Now that we can't see how many likes someone got on their latest photo, we hit the streets to ask whether our lives have actually changed.
Wavelength.
Aussies online may have noticed that they can't see how many likes a Facebook post gets anymore. While some are saying it's beneficial for users and their state of mind, others are sceptical about the company's intentions. I hit the streets of Adelaide to ask what people thought about the change.
It doesn't really bother me. I can see it from both points of view. For influencers, I guess it's a big thing that it's gone. But for everyone else, I don't think it really matters, to be honest.
I feel like it's not beneficial towards businesses specifically, and I sometimes you're just curious to see how many likes something's got.
Does it make you more comfortable to post on Facebook now that people can't see your numbers?
Yeah, it does. I just feel like I can post whatever I want. It doesn't have to be at the right time of the day to get as many likes or anything like that. But I also think if you really want to know, like, you can count how many likes there are if there's so little. But so it's not technically removing them. You can still see who's liked it. But yeah, it's definitely good.
Do you think that Facebook is doing this to benefit users or that they have an ulterior motive?
I think they have their own motive, to be honest.
What kind of motive do you think they have?
They want people to advertise through Facebook so they can generate more profit.
Wavelength.
Thank you, Amila, hitting the streets to ask whether your life has changed since Facebook removed like counts from posts. I haven't looked back, to be honest.
Oh, I honestly haven't really noticed it. But, like, I love how cynical that last guy was. Just like, the only reason they're doing this is to drive more ad revenue. Probably, though.
He's probably right. Let's be perfectly honest.
This is Facebook we're talking about.
Wavelength.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.